ago, in a distant land, I, Aku, the shape-shifting master of darkness.
All right, people. Time to talk about everyone's favorite Poirot movie. Pains me to say that. A Haunting in Venice, technically is based on Halloween Party in the sense that some of the characters share a name, and technically Poirot is in it. Um, Now I know the whole debate of, did the adaptations get the characters right is a bit cringe. So I think actually creating their own plot could have been a really good idea. You don't have to compare it to if the if it matches up every step of the way. Did this character do that? Whatever. So I'm willing to give it a break. I do think that at least Poirot, and in this case, Ariadne Oliver should be like their characters should match up. But I don't need every little thing to be the same. So that being said, did it hold up? Dear God, I think it's the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. I don't really want to talk about the Suchet version, just because it's not relevant, but because it's completely separate. But I want to say it. They had Zoe Wanamaker to play Ariadne Oliver, and I think like how are you gonna beat that? Just such a perfect character. Obviously Suchet. Um, then just a couple funny things in this one. Joyce Reynolds is the person who sort of like sparks the murder fest, and she's in a bee costume and sort of like not really taken seriously, and like she winds up lying. She was just retelling a story. Um, and the villain is actually quite a likable guy. He's like kind of charming and stuff. Obviously, once you get to know him, he's a lunatic, and the whole end is insane. Like, probably one of the more insane murder plots. Um, but yeah, doesn't really matter. Like, I don't think there's really a. I believe her name is Miranda. Like, I don't think there's really a character that sort of takes on her essence, and then this is essentially just one of the murder suspects and a girl at the party. Um, yeah, like a couple characters share a name. Like in the movie, Dr. Leslie Ferrier. I think he was like a lawyer or something in the original. Um, and like he had, I forget, like died or left like months before the movie even happened, and same with like Olga Semenov. But yeah, anyways, we're getting bogged down in the weeds. Let's just move on. Give you the quick rundown. They're sort of like Poirot's friends beforehand. First off, you got Poirot. Enough said about that. He's got to be there. I mean, technically, originally he wasn't actually at this one, which is actually an interesting point that maybe I should bring up later about how they're always saying death follows, but in the original that they based this off, like he wasn't even present for the death. He was like called to help them and came from like a different town. So like that's not really following in that sense, but who really cares about that? Now I want to say like surely Tina Fey can act. I don't even think she necessarily did a bad job acting in this. But God, the writing. I'm gonna be honest. In my notes, I just started writing like so and so says this. Ariadne is cringe. Like every time she spoke. Let me just find an example. Like early on in the party, she's sitting at like a bench and like kids are running around, and Olga Semenov runs up to her and is like, "Oh, I'm your biggest fan" or something. "I love your books." And her response is like, sadly, life doesn't round out so well as detective fiction. Like, just say thanks. I'm glad you like the books. Leave it at that. Don't be cringe. Um, and then we got. They must have said his name. I referred to him as Santino from John Wick the whole time. Like, I found out his name during the credits. It was like Vitali Portfoglio. Surely that's mispronounced. I had no idea. Like when the credits rolled, there was someone with a name like Santiago or Santino or something, and I looked him up, and it was just some random like background character. Like I literally had no idea. They must have said it. And he was supposed to be like Poro's bodyguard. Like you would think that. Like maybe I'm just an idiot and missed it. So like, you know, maybe I'm the problem. Anyways, we got our whole cast here. Let's start down here. We got Rowena Drake. She is hosting the party for whatever reason, even though her house literally looks like just the most condemned, unsafe. Turns out later that there's like a flooded basement that's full of bees, and like this place looks like it's gonna collapse. Her daughter died some amount of time ago, and that's sort of what eventually leads to these present day murders and the whole plot. Then she has a character, or a. I'm gonna be honest. I don't know really what she does nowadays. She used to be like the caretaker of Alicia, and she was like there just before she died, and kind of blames herself. She's like superstitious. She used to be a nun, and she doesn't like staying there after night. So when she's forced to for this, it's kind of like, oh wow. Um, Not really much said there. To be honest, my notes for Leopold the kid are just he will never know love. He's like the creepy know-it-all kid who like talks to ghosts and like is wiser than his years and 2,000-year-old dragon in the body of a whatever. He's the son of this guy, Dr. Leslie Ferrier or Ferrier, who's got PTSD basically and is definitely a loony. So he was Alicia's doctor. He was sent home from the war, and he was like basically told never practice again. But he was a family friend to Rowena Drake, and so for whatever reason he saw her, and then she died because he wrote it off as she's just like sad that her fiance broke up with her or something. Yeah, that's enough of that for now. These two, they were there to be suspects, but to be honest, I don't really think they added much. At one point, when Poirot's interviewing them, they try to escape, and they're tied up, and then like a scene later, they're untied. They don't really say that much. They don't really do that much. They're refugees. Their names are Nicholas Holland and Desdemona. Then we have Joyce Reynolds. She is like a fake psychic or a real psychic, who knows? Who shows up just after the party, so she's edgy, like tactfully late, to hold a seance for Rowena Drake to talk to Alicia, and we'll talk more about her later. And then we have Maxime, I believe, Maxime Gerard, and he shows up and he's like, yeah, I married so and so because she's rich, whatever. Basically, people have a negative view of him and he's stopped caring what they think, so he's just accepted it. He's kind of a dick. Like, well, he is full on, but it's also like he's the only character who was really wronged, so it's like you have a hard time rooting for anyone because everyone else is a bit lame, but the one guy who's not tremendously at fault for anything, like, is just unlikable. Alright, we're just gonna hop right in. I'm probably just gonna go sort of through it chronologically as it happens in the movie. Um, Maybe a couple things I'll touch on at the end, but without further ado. So, the very first opening bit is actually sort of exemplifies a lot of the issues, in that they sort of take one aspect of how they want to portray the character and just blow it up to like the maximum extreme. So it seems like they want Poirot to be the kind of like Sherlock detective where he's, or like Monk where he's got like some autistic focus. And in this case, it's like the eggs again. In the actual books of Murder on the Orient Express, there's that thing with him wanting two equally sized eggs, and it's kind of just like a random thing. And you get the sense that generally he's the guy who values like structure and order in his life, but he's not going to go out of his way too much. Like I would say, he's mostly a normal guy. He's incredibly polite and like he treats everyone nice. There's even a great example of like this in the Suchet version of this specific thing. He's on the train and he's got like the cart to him, or the like the train car or whatever, the room to himself, and then this sort of young disheveled looking guy comes and sits across from him, and at first he's sort of he's visibly like disappointed, like he judges the guy, but then as they start to talk, like he's polite to him, he doesn't say anything rude, and he finds out the guy's from the town he's going to, and he starts talking to him, and they spark up a conversation. You get the sense that that's a very pleasant conversation. And you get that sense that Poirot can pretty much have a pleasant conversation with anyone as long as it's separated from a case. Like, he'll make judgments about people, he'll have his negative views, but, like, he'll put that aside. Whereas in this, like, he's like clueless to people's emotions, it seems like. He's very untactful. Like, in this case, he's like got the weird obsession, and later on it seems like it pains him to not like straighten a photo in like this house that's just totally destroyed, and like there's mold and cracks, and it's a miracle it doesn't collapse with all these kids running around. And then with that also Ariadne is like very snippy, very like 20s American, I guess is how you would put it. Whereas her character is an interesting one. She's kind of like a self-insert. I don't think it's ever like specifically stated, but she's a murder mystery writer who has like a foreign detective that's not like too foreign. It's I think he's Swedish, and so she's sort of got those parallels to Agatha Christie, and kind of it seems like a way. I'm going to be honest, this is kind of speculation. I don't really have any. I haven't done my research, so to speak. But it almost seems like a way to sort of vent her frustration, kind of. Not in like a cruel way, but like she's always complaining about deadlines, and like her editors or whatever demanding stuff from her, and like her detective is like annoying her, just, always having to work on that. She's sort of like she's wealthy and whatever. She's been brought success by this guy, but also now she's tied to him. There's a whole interesting conversation to be had about that, but more or less, she's one of Poirot's friends. She's a recurring character every once in a while. She does quite like apples. Like, I think at one point she's getting out of her car and there's just apple cores like falling out, that kind of a thing. But once again, kind of like a normal person, like normal author, a bit very hard-headed. Like whenever she's working with Poirot, she often jumps to conclusions, and she's a like very big believer in women's intuition. Like she trusts her gut, but isn't destructive. Like for one, she always listens to Poirot's advice, even if she has her own ideas and directions. Like she's not gonna just ignore him. But she's willing to work on an idea and like talk to people and come to her own like ways of progressing. But she's not a detective, obviously, so that's not where her skills come from, but it's just something she happens to be pretty decent at. But yeah, in this, then one of her first scenes is, me, apples only till supper, and dear God, I weep for that woman's toilet. That sounds like a crime scene. So going back just a little bit, a new character that I don't believe is based off of anyone from any of the books. I might be just misremembering, but definitely not like a main character. Is the guy I mentioned Vitali or whatever. If I call him Santino, whatever, you'll know who I'm talking about. So he is Poirot's bodyguard, who's essentially hired to make sure no one ever talks to him. This is a bit weird because Poirot has retired, and oftentimes he retires and has a peaceful life. He's shown like growing vegetable marrows. And yes, he finds it a bit boring, so he comes out of retirement quite a bit and sort of retires and yada yada yada. But he's never like, must shut away from the human world. You know. Basically, he's like, he can't deal with the poor people, it seems like. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. And oftentimes, even when he's like technically retired, he still does cases when they come up. Like if he's in the area or if someone asks. Like he just gets to choose which ones he does. So yeah, in this he's straight up like got a guy who, for one, he tackles a guy, clotheslines him to the ground, and threatens his arm, and then one scene later pushes a guy into the Venice canals, which, as far as he knows, that could have been like attempted murder if the guy can't swim, which also is less common, I feel like, back in the day. But that's not really here nor there. And then later on, when Poirot's talking to Ariadne, he's like, sorry, this guy only does what I tell him, which is a bit weird. Maybe he didn't notice the guy being pushed in the canal. But then at the end of the movie, he's like, he mentions that the guy pushes people into canals. So Poirot's like, just straight up, an unlikable rich guy who can't be bothered by the normal people of the world. It's just baffling. It's like they make mistake after mistake, which could just be like an accident, but then they go out of their way to show that it's like an intended thing. And yeah. Oh yeah, then there's like this fantastic scene where they're talking, where Ariadne sits down after she gets past Vitali, with an apple to talk to Poirot. And Poirot's like, Ariadne Oliver. And she's like, yes, that's me, world's best writer, X bestsellers. Last three were flops, though.
And that's how exposition works. But of course, you already knew that.
Yeah, it's very much like, as you already know. Then she follows up by saying Poirot doesn't even know that today is Halloween, which kind of wild. That they're going with the whole angle where Poirot's literally like a shutaway. I At first it seemed like just he didn't like talking to outside people, and now it's like once again, like Sherlock Holmes, locked away in a dark room, not interacting with the world, doesn't talk to people, desperately needs a murder to keep him sane. The classic consulting detective that has all these personality flaws. I'm surprised they didn't make him addicted to opium at this point. And then she follows it up by explaining what Halloween is. Who is that for? Then they go on and she invites him to this party, and she says she's looked at it from all angles, but she's seen a million psychics, but this one specifically that she's talking about, it changed her mind, and she's the smartest person she's ever met. She being herself. Which is a bit of a switch up. Like, Ariadne seems to jump to conclusions often, so it's a bit weird. She's saying she looked at it from all angles, but then again, that's her perspective. So maybe, you know, it basically it was a warning flag that she was going to be wildly different from me, and this winds up being sort of relevant later to some aspects. But for now, it was just something that caught my attention, but isn't necessarily a problem. It was just like a better watch out. Then, so they make their way to their party because Poirot is convinced to basically prove her wrong or something. So they show up. Here you have Poirot. I believe Ariadne is in one of these, and that's probably like Vitali or something. Well, I don't know. Basically, they're all in their own boats, just driving from the same place to the same place. And Poirot's standing up. Like, that seems unwise, but I mean, clearly it's possible because the gondolier drivers or whatever do it. And then, just to add to the point that it's not like, oh, everyone has to go on their own. Like 30 kids all pile out of one. Like it's Hagrid showing them Hogwarts. So these guys are just dicks that had to all rent their own gondolier just to show up to the party and look all special. So yeah, it starts with a nice puppet light show, which was in the intro that you saw. Basically, they say that doctors killed a bunch of kids here. And I guess that means this place used to be like a orphanage or a hospital, or I guess hospital is what it would be imply. It doesn't really look like it. It looks like a house, but that doesn't really matter. Kids can be killed anywhere. You introduce Leopold, who's reading and like very creepy child, and then this weird thing. Olga's like, "Hey, don't you want to go and talk to the other party?" And she's like, "Why?" Or talk to the other kids. Like, "Why are you reading in a corner?" And then she immediately cuts to her telling Ariadne that she's a huge fan of her books, which is just a funny cut, but no problems there because she's looking out for a kid. It's not like some serious thing. And as I mentioned, Ariadne has that weird line about, sadly, life doesn't round out so well as detective fiction, even though she's just talking to someone who liked her books. They meet Rowena, nothing too special there. And then later on, you find out that Joyce Reynolds is the psychic that Ariadne was talking about. And she shows up, like, all creepy, standing in a boat alone, or maybe with her sidekick off, and in a mask. And she looks around like, no one cared who I was till I put on the mask. And her first words are just, this one will be very sad. Uh, and then I forget who it was, but then someone responds with, I expected someone more dramatic. Like, how is that even possible? This person is maximum drama. And then her response to being called a medium, sorry, to being called a psychic, is I prefer the term medium because I'm not big or small. What? I don't know. I got nothing. And then she calls herself, or calls Ariadne her nemesis, which was kind of weird. I guess there was a thing going on in the paper. And Poirot makes some comment about how he is Hercule Poirot. And Ariadne goes, you were Poirot. And I think that's about where I decided to just start noting that pretty much all of Ariadne's lines are written like that. It's just like the classic, I don't even want to say like Marvel one-liners because it feels below that. So then they go on this whole debate about how Poirot lost his faith and whatever, which is actually a change I don't necessarily mind. Technically speaking, he's a Christian, and you see that obviously he holds like Christian values, and like if anyone asks, that's what he would say. But like he's not really that religious. Like even at one point in the original book and like the Suchet version, at least, one of the characters basically committed suicide. This was months before he showed up because they were a lesbian and had like Christian guilt, and didn't want like that whole public scrutiny. And then the person that she loved found out and said something about how she found out too late, and wished that they could have basically been left alone to live their life. So, and like Poirot is like very understanding, doesn't judge them. So you see that like he is Christian, but like one of the good ones, so to speak. But overall for this, I don't really mind him not being Christian, basically because it's not that big of a deal. However, as he's saying like, I don't believe, or whatever, a chandelier crashes next to them, and Joyce looks at him and goes, you were saying? And it's just the worst, most smug thing ever. Like so that just happened. So then they start walking around. I believe the group is Poirot, Ariadne, Olga Semenov, but they're walking around the party, and he sees a rambling loony that belongs in Grippy Slippies, who turns out to be Dr. Leslie Ferrier, or as they call him here, Ferrier. I'm probably going to say both, so don't hold that against me. And he's sitting like rambling in a corner, and Poirot looks at him and he's like, how did Alicia die? Just the least tactful thing. And so Olga goes and explains the whole thing, and like the doctor was there and basically didn't do a good job, and like she committed suicide. And it's like, why would you ask that right in front of them? And then it follows up by them going into the room where the chandelier crashed from was Alicia's room, which has been locked ever since, and like Olga doesn't dust in there anymore by Rowena's wishes, and no one really goes in there. I think no one has been in there since. And yeah, which is an interesting topic that I'll bring up later. I guess put a pin in that. Poirot notices the lock. He doesn't comment on it here, but I'm just going to mention it here because it's kind of relevant. He sees this lock and later comments that there were fresh pick marks. So I'm wondering, like, if I forget if he says like fresh or shiny or something like that. So presumably he's talking about like these two, maybe. So maybe those are different than all the other tons of scratches. But like the door's chipped and like there's scratches all over the place and whatnot. So maybe I'm just not knowing. But he knows someone's been in the room because it's been picked. I don't know. Like, I guess he's paying more attention because the chandelier crashed. So like he is looking out for stuff. I'm not gonna hold it against him. I just think it's personally not very clear that that's the case. But this is random details here that don't matter. So they go into the room and Olga starts explaining everything in like excruciating detail again. This time, basically repeating the whole conversation that they had in front of Dr. Ferrier, except this time it's right in front of Rowena, who's first off the host of the whole party, and second off, like, right there, like, talking about negatively about her own daughter. Well, not negatively, but like reliving everything, and then mentions that, for one, this mark was found on her, and the police marked it as a scratches that were obtained in the fall or something, but they were superstitious, and that's apparently the mark of like that the children left on the doctors, whatever, from the whole haunted backstory of the house that's now cursed or whatever. Yeah, that doesn't really come up anymore. The whole like haunted house aspect, or rather the doctors and like the kids, like it's not that relevant, so probably not going to mention it again. But that's somehow they write off their scratches, and this is basically they see that and they're like, oh god, it was a haunting, because they're superstitious. I do think I'm going to touch more on the police aspect later, but we need to get into more stuff before talking about that. Then I don't know if I'll include a clip or not, but Joyce walks up. I guess she wasn't part of this specific part, and she just goes listening,
Listening.
like just a total goof, and that's repeated throughout the story. And I think at several points people tell Poirot to listen. Basically, I don't know if that was supposed to be like some motif or something. Something about like I think it's probably to do with like listening to the dead type thing, and they're all telling Poirot, and like he speaks for the dead because he's a detective who solves their crimes or something. I don't know. But she walks over and picks up the rabbit that was Alice's directly after Olga specifically says they don't touch or move anything in the room because Rowena like wants it to be exactly like when her daughter stayed there. And it's just like once again, I mean, Joyce is kind of like she's taking advantage of people because she's a fake psychic. So I mean, I guess who really um expected anything more from her? So then Maxime shows up, her ex fiance. He says he has an invitation, obvious to the seance specifically. Obviously, Rowena didn't send it to him, or doesn't says she doesn't didn't send it to him because she doesn't like him, and that basically her dislike of him is what led to the whole led to Alice's death in the long run. And he walks in, he's insufferable, but as I said before, he's like the only guy who didn't like do anything incredibly wrong other than Olga who's in the clear. So it's kind of like weird. Like basically shows up and she's calls him a gold digger and he's like, "Yeah, I am. What of it?" But and then you find out that no, he really did love Alicia, and like he did break things off at one point. Um, but because basically Rowena hated him and thought he was after the money, so he broke off things with Alicia after a while because he was like, I'll never be important enough to Alicia because her mother will always come first, and like there's that huge wedge between them. So he's like, how can he marry someone when he's not really the most important thing in their life in a sense? But then he goes back after a little bit and realizes like no, his love is greater than that. He wants to work through it. And then even then after that, he has a negative opinion of Dr. Ferrier because he was inadequate in trying to treat Alicia and in a sense wasn't able to save her. So they have a problem, but even in the midst of like him losing his mind, Dr. Ferrier, that is, being the one losing their mind, he's like, pull it together, I think of your child. So, like, he's kind of a dick, but also these people wronged him, so, like, can I really hate him for being a dick to them? Yeah, I don't know. They start to sit down for the seance. Leopold, the 40-year-old kid, says he talks to ghosts, but they think Joyce is a fake because he's the greatest and creepiest of them all. Then she says she uses a seance or whatever her like conduit. I don't know what you would call it. Is a typewriter because she views herself as a secretary of the dead. She's just really spouting off whatever similes of wisdom over here. The seance is like 4 small tables set up around her, and she starts doing her thing. And as she's getting into the thick of it, then Poirot's like, enough of this. And just walks over and yoinks a dude out of the chimney, which turns out to be Nicholas, who is the half brother to the other helper. And that helper was present, but she's kind of like shown to be like more like an assistant to Joyce. She just sets everything up and kind of like the bait or whatever, the decoy. Like they're like, oh, she has an assistant, so then they don't think about the fact that there might be another guy hiding in the room. And that's where it's relevant that Poirot sees someone had picked the lock because Nicholas had snuck in here to hide in the chimney. And essentially he was using an electronic signal to send to the typewriter to make it look like she's receiving messages from the dead. I don't know if he was like, was he just like holding himself up with his raw strength for this whole seance that was like presumably like a long time? If so, dude's yoked. Because he's just like floating up in the chimney unless there's some secret hidden chair type thing in there. It doesn't seem like it because he just pulls, like, Poirot just puts his cane up in there and yoinks him out by the leg. I don't know, maybe he's Spider-Man or something. So then after that, Poirot reveals everything, and then the windows slam open, and Joyce starts spinning around and just reeing. She's just going wild, like, and just starts pointing at everyone and saying, "You killed me." And then there's audio altered, like, monster roar comes out of her. And are we supposed to believe that happened in, like, the character's perspective? Because that's a bit weird. No one ever addresses that. And then after that, she perfectly mimics Alicia's voice. And as far as we know, she's never heard her before. And also, how is she doing that? Because it's not like recordings exist, and definitely not recordings that don't have like audio flaws at this time. I mean, I guess probably like gramophones and stuff exist. But yeah, basically it's not possible realistically. This is never touched again. The characters say she perfectly mimicked Alicia's voice, and they never address how it's possible. They definitely imply that she's not actually psychic, and I sure hope they're not going with that angle, but they never mention it. And then it just cuts from that, her going wild, to everyone just sort of everyone standing around like they're all separated. The seance ended. Poirot's basically like, I did my job. I didn't prove every little detail wrong, but, clearly she's faking it. And Joyce says she's going to come back for another seance tomorrow to see if, like, she can get any more information. So then Joyce talks to Poirot, and she's trying to, like, high road him, saying, "We're not so different, you and I. We both speak for the dead." And then she references a war nurse, which is Poirot's made-up backstory. And she's like, "All your life, death follows you." She names Catherine or whatever. She names Catherine specifically, and then says, "We won't meet again," even though she wants Poirot to show up tomorrow for the seance. And in theory, you would think that if she's naming specific things about his backstory, he would want to know how she knows that. And so it's like, why will they never meet again? I don't know. I guess she somehow saw it. And then after all that, she's all serious mode. Then she's like, and besides, if I am a phony, no one's getting hurt. Which sort of undercuts the entire tone. And then puts her cloak and mask on him, which serves no point other than plot convenience for the next scene, and walks off. It's not like, you need to learn to see things from my perspective. No, she's just like lighting up and puts on her mask, or her mask on him. So then, for no reason, he sort of walks around in it. He sees the apple bobbing station that like hundreds of kids have been doing. And it's got like rust on the sides of it, and that water's been sitting there for hours. And he's like, all right, I'm going to lighten up and bob for an apple. Obviously, I don't, the disease part of it isn't the kind of thing you think about in movies. I just thought it was funny. And an interesting comparison, actually, there is apple bobbing in the original one, and it's actually a bit of a relevant plot point in a sense. The water, someone is wet, and that's like a relevant clue later on. However, another game they do is called like Snapdragon or something. They put a bunch of like rum-soaked raisins or not prunes, or dates or some small fruit like that, and they light them on fire and chuck them in a big bowl in a room with no lights, and the kids are like chanting and pulling them out as quick as they can to try and not get burned. I'm assuming that's a real game or something, but that is insane, and I just thought that was funny. But yeah, so he goes to Bob, and then he almost gets drowned, like someone behind him is pushing his head down, and then Vitaly runs up and pulls him out after a second, but neither of them see who did it. And then while they're sort of recovering from the shock, and Poirot's like, oh no, they thought I was Joyce. First of all, Joyce is pretty tiny, and Poirot's like supposed to be egg-shaped, and Kenneth Branagh is not like a small guy, but Joyce Reynolds is relatively small. So you'd think they would notice, or like something. I don't know. Maybe they. And it's not like they saw his mask too much, because like he was leaning in a bowl of water. But I don't know. It doesn't really matter. More contrived things happen in stories all the time, and no one cares. So. But yeah, so Joyce Reynolds is pushed to her death off a balcony onto like a statue. I think it had his hands raised up, and she gets impaled. So then everyone groups up, and they're like all shocked, and they're in a room, and Santiago walks over and just pulls apart like a globe that has a phone in it, and he calls the police. And at the time, I was like, how does he know that that's there? Turns out that's a clue. And then later on, in a different scene, actually, there's a phone ringing from what can only be described as like hidden, like secret crevice behind a tapestry. I don't know if it was supposed to be a normal spot, but it looked like almost like a big old windowsill type thing with a tapestry in front of it. And I just was like, is Santino's like his whole bit is like he just pulls phones out of random hiding spots, and it turns out that he's been to this house before, so he knows where they are. I guess we'll talk about it now. It comes up later. Basically, he was the police officer that pulled Alicia out of the water. The thing is, though, the police instantly ruled it suicide because he was superstitious and didn't put time into it. The thing is, they call him a policeman. And like it's implied that or not implied. It's stated that he was the guy who pulled Alicia out of the water. So you would think that he's like not the detective, so to speak. Like he's more of the beat cop type thing. If he's the first responder on the scene, like when they receive the trouble or the word of some accident, or if he just happened to see it. I'm assuming he was just the police were called. It doesn't seem to say that like he witnessed anything. But then he's also the guy who closed the case early because it was deemed a suicide. So how much of this like power is put on like one guy that he can just like with no evidence rule something like a closed case? And like see the marks that are on her. Yeah, bit strange. And then on top of that, if he closed the case like instantly, he most likely wasn't searching the house for clues because like he doesn't think it was a murder. So like, why is he going through everything? Like maybe he walks around her room, but why does he know that there's a phone in the globe? Why does he whatever? Like he's been to the house. That doesn't mean he's explored all of its secrets. Maybe he had a reason to call the police, even though he was there. And, like, I don't know. It's a bit strange, but not worth dwelling on any further. That's just the story of this story. Is just so many things that add up that make me go, well, that's weird. And then there are the actual larger problems. And then someone mentions that Miss Reynolds was a nurse in the British Army. So we presume this is how she knows Poirot's backstory. However, this doesn't turn out to be the case. So Poirot hears the whole she was a nurse and then he was like, you know what, I'm going to take the case. And he locks everyone in. And he tells Vitali to watch the gate and someone else to watch Vitali, who's like, what, you don't trust me? And then he asks Ariadne for help, and she's kind of giddy and to assist and brings out the real Poirot, like he's back. Everyone's been asking me if I'm back, and I'm thinking I'm back. And then she spots Baba the rabbit, who was the rabbit that Joyce had grabbed earlier under a raining painting. I don't know why I mentioned that. It's not really relevant, but it is once again a clue for something, the worst twist. Or maybe the second worst. There's a lot of bad ones in here. So they go around and they start interviewing people, and they make a big thing about lists. Which is, again, it seems like they saw a small thing from the books and they like blew it up into a thing. Basically, in this one, like Poirot's like a very stereotypical like, oh, he's got to follow the list type thing in a sense. I don't know. So they first interview Rowena, or at least that's who I'm first talking about. There's a bunch of stuff, but then Rowena says the quote, "Why grow?" Or that Alicia said, "Why grow wildflower honey when we could buy some for 6 lira?" I don't know why I said liar. I don't know why I wrote liar. But yeah, so it sort of stands out. It's a bit of a weird one. Little did we know this is foreshadowing. And then Ariadne is like, hey, that's great and all. I know we wanted to see this garden for reasons, but can we get out of the rain? And Poirot's like, well, he wants to stand in the rain, basically. Which is, once again, small change from the book that doesn't matter, but it's like, they're, like, Poirot's, he'll walk, like, through the mud if he's got to, but, he's not trying to. Then they talk to Maxime Girard in the kitchen, and he's cutting up an apple. By the way, apparently he's a chef. That isn't relevant. But, yeah. And they presume he's broken up because he's a gold digger. He found out that Rowena didn't actually have that much money, and now he's married some rich woman in New York. And he, at first, is like, well, you've heard it. That's true. But then a picture of Alicia that's torn up, and so you only see her half. And he says there's a picture of them, and she tore it up. That falls out of his pocket after he cut his thumb, which I'll talk more about in a second. But you find out that no, he really did love her. He returned home. He tried to see her again. Rowena wouldn't let it happen mostly because she didn't like him, but she said she was too sick or something like that. Then Alicia died. And so he blames himself a bit, blames Rowena a bit. But then also, as I mentioned, he had cut his thumb. Ariadne's there, and she's like, put some honey on it. It's good for cuts. Kind of weird, but, what medicine back then? What are you going to do? So he puts some honey on it, and he, like, sniffs it or licks it or something. He's like, not wildflower. Can't place it. Once again, the line's just so, like, obvious or whatever. Like, I'm not I'm no genius. Like, oftentimes when I watch murder mysteries, detective things, I don't necessarily. I don't know how to. Like, I can shut my brain off. Like, I'm not really predicting things, so, like, I don't often necessarily guess things. Like, I'm not some. Not like I know everything, but even there, I was like, okay, well, that's a clue. And also, I should mention the story, the plot, everything is different from the book and the TV show. So it's not like I had some unfair advantage. Like, honey isn't a thing in the main one, even. But yeah, there's the talk with Olga. She's the only housekeeper Rowena could get because of the haunting with the dead children and whatever. She is superstitious, and she was a nun of 9 years, but she met a guy and fell in love. And once again, Ariadne's cringe. And Olga's like, "What are you doing to Paro?" after he started questioning everyone and locked them in. So presumably he's explained what he's doing and why they're all locked in the house. And he literally explains what a detective is. He's like, make assumptions based on clues and deductions. And it's like, I know what a detective is. I know what a private detective is. We know what's happening here. We don't need that explained. However, then Olga's like, "Oh, like in Ariadne's books," and asks if he's based himself on them, which is like, it's like not something anyone would ever like say. But once again, apparently that was a clue this whole time for a twist so dumb that I didn't even think about it. And then magic water forms the shape of an M because Olga's saint was Maria. Ooh. But only Poirot sees it. The doctor shouts out that he's not a loony, like a loony. Basically, his backstory is he saw concentration camp survivors and is haunted because something along the lines of I think they tried to save them, but they didn't have supplies or something, or they gave them milk, and that was bad. So they wound up burning them. I think it was. I kind of missed the point of the story, but basically he saw the Holocaust and the horrors of it, and wasn't able to save people. So he shot himself in the chest, which, I'm no expert. That seems like a weird place to shoot yourself if you're going to shoot yourself. Like, you never really hear about getting shot in the chest, but he lived. He was sent home, told to stop practicing. He saw Alicia as a favor to Rowena, and also he's in love with Rowena, so he's a big simp. And also, he's pretty oblivious to everything. Like, there's a scene where he examines Joyce's body and like misses some obvious things to show that he misses obvious things. Yeah, I wrote that Poirot then starts interviewing people like he's got dementia. I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember why I wrote that, so maybe I'm no problem. And then returning to the bathroom just to be haunted. He talks to Leopold, who's creepy, and says, "Battle fatigue. I think that's unfair." He says his father has battle fatigue, and Poirot, basically. And he's like, "I think that's unfair. He's not tired, he's broken." Which sounds 10 times worse than being tired. It's kind of a weird diss on his father. And then, because Poirot's acting like he's lost his mind, Leopold's like, "You were dead too, sir. They see you as one of their own." Just an example of what he's like. And later on, he says that some of the dead are his friends. Then Ariadne refers to Hercule as Hercules. I don't know if that's supposed to be a compliment, like he's some type of savior, or if she doesn't know how to pronounce his name, but she calls him Hercule later, so I don't know. So then they go to talk to Desdemona and Nicholas separated. They found out that their original names, or at least the names they had before, were like Horvat Nivkin and Orania, and they were like Hungarian Romani people who were saved or they're like refugees from the war. And essentially, one thing before I get into them, and so before they start talking, Santiago randomly pops his head into the room that Ariadne and Poirot are talking in as they're preparing to talk to the siblings or half siblings, and he's like, "Those two criminals aren't to be trusted." Even though right now Poirot has said he's to be guarding the gate so no one escapes. So it's weird that he's not guarding the gate. And also, he wasn't anywhere near the conversation, so he shouldn't know that Poirot is about to interview them. So why did he pop in to say that? And then as a follow up, it's never explained why he says that. Like, he's a police officer, sure, but you obviously assume that he's got some backstory, like he knows that they're thieves or something. But no, they've never met. He says they're not to be trusted. Ariadne says, I wish you'd told us this before. No one asks any further questions, and that's that. So then while they are talking to them, this isn't explicitly stated, but I'm pretty sure Nicholas believes Joyce had some type of powers, but that they fake stuff to make it like more explicit or something. Like basically it's based on reality in a sense. Desdemona says she's a phony, and that Joyce sort of flattered Nicholas to keep him in line and ordered Desdemona around like a duchess. And then she wants to go to America because of the movie Meet Me in St. Louis that they've only ever seen half of, but they've seen half of it like 1,000 times because the soldiers that saved them had it or something like that. And Nicholas is like, he could take it or leave it, but that's her dream, so he wants it because he likes her. And it's not proven, but it seems like Desdemona started stealing from Joyce Reynolds, but Nicholas didn't know to fund their escape. Once again, not really known, but Joyce probably found out, and either way, it's not like they could ever do anything negative to Joyce because they were like illegal immigrants, so they would essentially have no rights and not be taken seriously if they brought anything to light about her. During this interview, when Poirot starts lighting the heat underneath Desdemona, she gets spooked, runs out of the room, but is caught. They're tied back to back on chairs on top of a table with Santiago watching them. Why is he no longer watching the gate? I don't know. Never addressed again. Never stands at the gate again. Guess no one's escaping now, even though these two people tried to escape, but the gate's no longer watched. Whatever. And at this point, I'm going to mention that there's like random cutaways at a bunch of points to like outside in the water. It's all stormy, and like random wooden beams are breaking apart, and it seems to imply that like maybe the building's at risk of falling into the ocean. I am not sure because it's never discussed really. Like there's a thumping coming from the basement, which you later find out is water. But that's not really a plot point. It just sort of happens. Like if the building was at risk of collapsing, why would they have like every kid in Venice, not literally, in their house? So Poirot starts hearing voices. No one else hears them. He finds a girl, but it was a ghost, the ghost of Alicia. And then they all hear a sound, and someone's literally like, must have been the pipes, must have been the wind. But no, Poirot's like, it's coming from the basement. But Rowena says, there is no basement. Oh no. But there is. Poirot walks over and kicks open a solid stone fake door without a first or a second thought. I feel like that's how you break your leg, kicking open a stone door, like, especially a fake one, you know. What are the odds that that wasn't locked or like had some type of latch? And also, Poirot is known for his brains, so surely finding the like the entrance would be more of like a better way of displaying that. And the fact that he's an old man and not to be kicking open random doors. So yeah, they start going down in the basement, and this scene is edited together. Like I'm gonna show it. It's insane. I'm not not. I haven't touched this at all. This is it verbatim. So yeah, the doctor basically, for what you see, the doctor goes loony on Maxime. There are bees in the basement, and that's that. They find out that there were that the story about the doctors that killed a bunch of kids is true. So maybe the building really is haunted. I don't know. The basement's never mentioned again, and yeah. The doctor gives Poirot a "we're the same, you and I, death follows" type thing. For the third time, a person says, "listen," and then while they're having that conversation, the doctor tells him to listen or whatever, and then falls asleep immediately after saying it. Oh, this is technically where the scene happens where they interview Maxime. I mentioned it earlier on accident, but where he cuts his finger and all that. And then just the worst scene. This is where I had made it to in the first time I was watching it. And I saw it, and I just was like, nope, I'm coming back to this later. And just forgot about it for months. And here we are now.
But wait, you ain't seen nothing yet.
What do you think?
A simple note?
Look at that subtle off-white coloring. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god. It even has a watermark.
Okay, not that scene. It's this one, I promise. This time it's the real one.
No distinguishing language. The stationery is plain. It is cleanly typewritten, professionally anonymous.
Okay, yeah. So that also turns out to be a clue, I think. It's kind of Poirot hallucinating or something. But as you find out, for one, at this point, Maxime is lying on a couch in a locked room that only Poirot has the key to. And Poirot is interviewing Vitali, and Ariadne's there. And symbolically, she's standing next to Vitali, and Poirot's on the other side of the room, symbolizing that they are on a team and he is on a team. And basically, Poirot points out that Vitali was the police officer, and he's like, yeah, you got me. And then he says that Ariadne is in league with him, and they were both in league with Joyce Reynolds. And so the idea there is that they teamed up to work with Joyce to trick Poirot. Basically, Ariadne's like, you have no friends, you have followers or admirers or something like that. Calling back to that first scene where Poirot says he has no friends, but then turns out he has a friend who's Ariadne. But yeah, she says that essentially the way they met was she forced him, bullied him into allowing her to shadow him so she could then write a detective book, and that detective book was just Poirot thinly veiled. And now she's been writing flops, so she needed to swindle Poirot and then write a book about how she fooled him, and then she would become famous again. And this is just, I hate this twist so much. Ariadne is like, for one, you get the sense that for sure, she is a respected author. She's Poirot's friend. She's straight up a good person. And this feels like a spit in the face of Agatha Christie, and especially considering this is the character that kind of is Agatha Christie. She's like a money-grubbing author that doesn't care about anyone, and to the point where, when you think about it, the fact that she's slighting Poirot doesn't matter. She took advantage of a grieving mother who lost her daughter, and they're baiting her into believing that, like, her daughter's tormented soul is trapped in the castle or whatever, and, like, there was a murder. They accuse, like, the whole you killed me scene earlier. They don't have any proof of that because Vitali thought that it was a suicide or that it was ghosts. So that's messed up. She's straight up evil. Like, she's debatably one of the worst characters here. And that's not really paid enough attention to. Like, there's no real resolution to that. Because while they're in the middle of this conversation, it turns out that Dr. Ferrier is being killed. And yeah, that was one of two scenes that was pretty unforgivable for me. One of the, like, most notably bad ones. This one's slightly less bad because at least at the end of the day, you can just say, this is a character, I'm going to separate it from everything I know about them. I'm just going to watch the movie how it's presented, which is badly. But yeah, so moving on, or I guess real quick before we move on, basically Santino became a bodyguard because of the Alicia Drake case. He decided he didn't have the skin for it, and he's the guy who canceled it. Oh, and actually, in addition to that, Ariadne is presumably the reason why Joyce knows about Poirot's backstory, not the fact that Joyce happened to also be a nurse. And how she knows some things about Alicia. However, they also say that the police officer didn't really investigate, so it's weird that she has like knowledge that even the police officer I wouldn't think has, but whatever. Oh, and also that's how the extra things happen, like the chair spinning and Bob the Rabbit disappearing and like the windows slamming open, is because Ariadne and whatever were in on it too. Ariadne says that Poirot's only famous because of her. I hate it. Oh, she also has another cringe line because she always has to, that he quit because he's like a black cloud of death or something. Also, I'm jumping in here during editing. It doesn't make sense that seemingly no one who worked in the house or around it at the time recognizes Vitali. Like, Olga should for sure recognize him. Dr. Ferrier should. No one mentions this ever when they're just like chilling in a house with the murders happening and like people hiding things from Poirot. I feel like someone would mention it. Okay, so now moving on. I'm done for real. The doctor dies inside a locked room, and Ariadne, while they're in the room, picks up a book I believe that Leopold was reading and quotes a random quote during the murder reveal. Like, and she has it like open to the page. Like, did she know the quote existed and like she needed to thumb through to like show it to have that extra little punch? Or did she see the body and like started skimming this book and was like, oh, this quote's kind of relevant? So yeah, they're dead in the room, chaos happens, and we cut to Poirot in the room. Remember that though, that everyone else was in the room where Ferrier was killed. Poirot goes up to Alicia's room. He breaks a mirror, or a mirror explodes next to him, and the teacup that was on her bedside table, like half off the table, falls and shatters, and he sees the other half of the photo that Maxime had. I don't think that's relevant. It doesn't seem to cause any big breaks or anything. However, the way he finds it is by crawling under the bed. I think it was under the teacup or something, but it fell under there. I might be misremembering that. I know he looks under the bed and like is lying down on broken pottery or whatever, broken china, which, bold move. And then we cut back to the other people. Maxime Gerard is walking to the gates, and he's like, you know what? Too many murders, I'm out. And then the gates slam shut, and Poirot's up there. For one, aren't the gates already closed? Isn't that why Vitali was guarding them? Because the gates were closed and no one was allowed out? That's weird. And for two, he definitely teleported down there because he was upstairs and they were right next to the exit. And they were on their way to their exit. They were storming out. And then Poirot goes up, wanders around, has an epiphany, and then beats them to the exit. And here we are. We're ready for the big reveal. However, I have another question. All right, I promise I'll stop doing this, but I have one more thing I want to talk about before we actually get to the end. Here's where the scene takes place that I was talking about, where Poirot teleports up to the top, these gates fall. This is, I'm assuming, the first floor. You have the water here, and this is Venice, so like everything is water. That's not a house, more or less. Obviously not literally. I'm wondering, like, where is the room for the basement? Like, is it underwater? Because we're showing that the basement is half flooded. So it has to be below this, weirdly. But this is like at water level. I had another thought while editing. In the scene earlier with the bees, we saw that the basement windows were just above the water line, and when it gets choppy, the water starts coming in. And they look out into the street or the stream or whatever. So how does no one know that this house has a basement when there are visible windows and you can see the basement from the outside of the house? Just another weird note. But let's move on and talk about the big reveal. So Poirot reveals that For one, the first murder of Alicia was done essentially by her mother, Rowena. Rowena was torn up that her daughter was leaving, so she tore up all her flowers and she replaced them with poisonous flowers. The poisonous flowers then were like pollinated by bees, and those bees made poisonous honey, like hallucinogenic honey. So she used that to keep her daughter sick, so she would stay by her mother. However, then one night she had to eventually had to sleep and leave her daughter's side. Her daughter started having like nightmares or whatever, started going wild, and Olga didn't know what to do, so she gave her tea like her mother did and just put like a buttload of honey in it, which then caused her to OD. However, she OD'd after Rowena left, after Olga left. Like Olga gave her the tea, calmed her down, and left, and then she OD'd. So Rowena goes in, sees her dead on the bed. She gets this little scraper thing with like 4 prongs that randomly there's like a bunch of them. Like there's one in the room where uh in like her daughter's room, like off to the side on the ground. And I hope it's a new one, because why would she keep the murder weapon around? Or not the murder weapon, but the proof that like she scraped her daughter's back. Basically, okay, let me finish talking about that first. Basically, she sees her daughter's body on the bed. She scrapes her back to make it look like the mark that the children gave doctors or something like that, and then chucked her overboard. That's then what led to all this stuff. So yeah, why does she keep a scraper in that room thing? I'm assuming it's like some type of gardening tool, which once again, why is that in Alicia's room? And then that's what she uses on Joyce Reynolds when she killed her. Like she had another one of those garden scrapers, and then later on, then she holds one at Poirot, sort of like a weapon. It's like, where are all these things coming from, and why is that the go-to? All right, we can finally talk about something that I brought up ages ago, near the beginning of this video. Rowena Drake made it so that no one ever went in Alicia's room. This is a bit weird since we now know that she's the murderer. Ideally, you would think that it would be best to completely clean the room out and get rid of any sign of anything happening. And could even have the excuse that the sight of the room is like too haunting for her and she wants to put her daughter's memory to rest by cleaning it up, and she wants to do it herself, sort of for symbolic reasons. Then also another weird thing is she kept the poison like in her linen closet, very obviously invisible, and like the housekeeper obviously found that, but she thought it was honey. So yeah, weird spot, but whatever. And then the doctor, the way that she got rid of it is because Vitali was the policeman on case who was superstitious, so he didn't do his job. And then Dr. Ferrier was the doctor at the inquest. He also did a terrible job and didn't notice like anything and was like, yep, it's a suicide, because he was torn up by guilt. And I have to wonder, why is he the doctor at the inquest? I guess the answer is like he was her doctor, like he was who was seeing her. But I feel like in a murder inquest, or I guess not murder inquest, but in an inquest involving like the death of a young person, it's kind of weird that they would choose a guy who's been told by the military to never practice again. And I would think that comes with revoking a medical license. So all's well and good for Rowena. However, then she receives a blackmail letter. This is where she loses all her money, why she can't repair her house, why it's run down, even though there was nowhere where the money should have gone in theory. She thinks that she thinks one of two things. Either Dr. Ferrier blackmailed her because he recognized the poison, or then she later comes to believe that Joyce Reynolds was the one who knew, because Joyce was like, oh, I'll do a seance for you, and offered like an expensive seance or something like that. So then Rowena hires her for the opportunity to kill her.
Disposing of me, you'll find your target.
So yeah, it turns out Rowena, this tiny chick, was the one who chucked Joyce off the balcony. So yeah, first Rowena kills Joyce, and then because things are going wrong or whatever, she confesses to Dr. Ferrier, thinking that he is the blackmailer. This is while he's sealed in the room alone, and she basically says, "If you don't do what I tell you, I'm gonna kill your son." So he acts like someone's in there attacking him, and then like stabs himself in the back, basically. And then after she admits to everything in front of like everyone here, she closes the doors, runs away, and then she runs up to like a balcony or something somewhere upstairs. This is that like four-pronged thing. I don't know what it is, but they're all over the place apparently. She holds that to Poirot. Poirot's looking at her, and then a big old ghost appears of Alicia, who then drags her off the balcony, and she drowns. And we also have the big reveal that all the ghosts Poirot saw, all the magic water, the child, any sounds he heard was because he was drugged with hallucinogenic honey. The worst possible twist in a horror or detective show. That the character was drugged and the hallucinogens made them see what they wanted, or what they, I don't know, what the murderer wanted them to see. So any problems we have are explained away with the fact that Poirot was hallucinating. I absolutely hate this reveal. It's the worst. Just proof that like they don't really understand the genre they're going for, I guess. And yeah, it fails as a horror or like as a Halloween-esque movie, and it fails now as like a detective thing because all the clues are kind of thrown out the window because half of them can just be explained away as not even being real. I think there's probably some way to do it properly, but you definitely need a lot of care to go into it. And if for the most part, it's always just going to come away as like a cheap misdirection to make it seem like the audience never had a chance of knowing what was going on. So yeah, it turns out the detective's sweet after all, even though this guy was a fraud who led to the murder of tons of people. Well, tons is an overstatement. And he was like chucking people off canals. But yeah. And then Poirot goes around and we find out who was blackmailing Rowena this whole time. It was actually Leopold, who saw his father's notes and found out that Alicia was being poisoned because it was pretty obvious. One actual good bit of foreshadowing, I guess, is when Dr. Ferrier was looking at Joyce's body, he misses obvious clues because, he's off his rocker and shouldn't be practicing. He missed the obvious clues that Alicia was being poisoned. But his son happened to notice because he had read a book that used a similar poison or the same poison or something. So he blackmailed her to help his father and eventually essentially led to his death. Yeah, at this point, Poirot goes out of his way to specifically flaunt every moral he has. So for one, it's not clear, but essentially he lets Rowena off herself. You can make an argument he wasn't able to stop her from doing it. Sure. I think he could have approached it in a different... Like, he knew he was going to turn on her, so he could have had someone stop her. But that one's less on him. Then also, this whole time, he could have just not done anything. Everyone locked up or whatever, kept safe. Everyone's together all the time. He doesn't run around investigating. The police show up in a day and do the whole thing, but he specifically is like, no, I have to do this. I have to prove to you, talking to Ariadne, that I am Poirot. I still got it. Yeah, so for his ego, he disregards the well-being and leads to the death of two people, or I guess technically one. Joyce was dead either way, and puts everyone else at risk. So yeah, the Rowena offs herself. Then he doesn't tell anyone about the fact that Leopold was blackmailing her. He also doesn't tell anyone about the fact that those two siblings are illegal immigrants and refugees. That one I don't hold against him, because why would he do that? But he also gave them a fat stack of cash, in the sense that he says, hey, Leopold, you should give the money to them that you got from blackmailing. He doesn't turn in Vitali, the police officer who didn't do his job properly and let a murderer escape and somehow had way too much power. So pretty much everyone who left... Oh, and also, actually, Ariadne caused this whole mess by faking a seance type thing and like just trying to haunt a grieving mother. So essentially everyone leaving the house is a terrible person or like some type of criminal, and Poirot does nothing about it. Like, the police get Rowena's body, but like, are they just taking his word for it? Like, how did he explain that it happened? Do they not need any proof about any of the crimes that happened here? Like, you know, they're not talking to anyone. Everyone goes their separate ways. Like, they're clearly not going to interview the two siblings. They're a bit of a flight risk, you know. They're on their way to a different country, you know. But the police are like, there was a murder, 2 murders, and Poirot told us this, so I guess all is solved. So also, while we're doing this whole wrap-up, they're all standing like outside the house. And this is the house that Poirot kept locked down and didn't let police into. A lot of walkways here, a lot of houses, a lot of things. You're telling me no police officers could get in there? No one was allowed to leave the house? This was a closed circuit type thing? For what reason? I don't... Like, they shouldn't have shown this shot. It clearly looks like there were plenty of ways to walk. Unless you're telling me this whole thing was all her house, or that none of these people... Or, like, no one lives here, no one can help them, no one can, you know... keep a watch on all these people who might be murderers until the police can get there and hold them all in separate things, and then Poirot can do his job without risk of killing everyone. So yeah, then him and Ariadne share like a moment, and she's like, how will you live your life? At least, you know, be a good person or something. Like, this guy isn't like 80 years old or whatever, deserves to be retired if he wanted to be. And also, like, she didn't backstab him and cause the death of 2 people and have no soul at all, and turns out she was not his friend and using them this whole time. But anyways, then it cuts to Poirot opening his doors to help random people who were all, like at the beginning of the movie, wanted help from him. And it's supposed to be this feel-good moment of he's back out there, you know, solving crimes, helping the world. Except it does prove that he can solve crimes without having everyone locked down, because he immediately solves a guy's crime with only like a flyer of like basic information. So clearly Poirot didn't need everyone to be locked in that house just for him to have this revelation. And yeah, and here we see that Joyce never really had enough information to like prove that there was a crime that happened. I guess the theory was she wanted to be vague about it, then Ariadne could learn whatever Poirot learns in that one day between then, and then feed that information to Joyce so that then the second seance would be more detailed. I don't know. Kind of weird how she starts saying murderer even though there's never anything to believe that that's the case, but whatever. So all in all, I hate everything about this, and I guess we'll see you next time. I feel like we're in it for the long haul. One thing that's weird is that even though they're like taking characters from Poirot, they have an aversion to casting a Dr. Hastings, who's like actually like Poirot's closest friend. He likes working with him. He likes that Hastings, essentially he says that he's always like the first to jump to the wrong answers, kind of, in a way. Like, he obviously not in a mean way, but like Hastings is fairly observant enough, but like Poirot's always laying out clues for him and saying, you know, like, you have all the same information as me, you could have figured this out, like, you don't need my help. I don't know. But yeah, they are great friends. I'm sort of saying that weirdly, but they're friends, and Hastings isn't like, he's not really like a Watson or something, because like he goes off and does his own thing. Like, they don't live together. He's gone for months at a time. I think he moves to like Argentina or something at one point. But he's around every once in a while, and it's kind of weird that they're like picking stories, or specifically, I don't think he's been in any of the three that they've done. But yeah, like picking stories that he's not in, even though I would have thought that they wanted to like purely milk the relatable names or something. I don't know. But either way, it's probably a good thing because it would just upset me if they had cast him. Like, imagine if they had gutted his character like they did Ariadne. Also, no Inspector Japp, who's kind of a lovable police officer. And he breaks the mold of the police officer who's too proud and dumb. Like, he's friends with Poirot. He has his moments. Obviously, he's not the brightest guy in the world or whatever, but he's a well-meaning police officer who's good in his own rights, whereas Poirot's just like a step beyond everyone. Yeah, I guess that's it for now.